Thank you, Nathan, for that beautiful rendition of one of our old favorite songs. If you were like me, you likely know the stories in the New Testament fairly well, but find the stories in the Old Testament a bit more of a challenge. There are many characters, there's many battles, and I have a hard time remembering the details. The best way for me to learn about someone is to go to their land and reimagine their story. Or at least that's the excuse I give my husband, especially when I said, I want to go to the Holy Land. So last year, when we were in Jordan, about 2 kilometers east of the Jordan River, basically out in the wilderness, and I'll show you the picture of the wilderness if you've never seen the wilderness. It is dry, it is brown, the trees are basically just shrubs. That is what most of Jordan looks like. And while we were out there, we saw a billboard in the middle of the wilderness, and it said, "This is where Elijah ascended into heaven." And there was this lovely mosaic beside it. And the mosaic shows, you can see the chariot of fire with God in it. And you can see Elijah and Elisha beside him. And Elisha's not knowing what's going on as Elijah's being taken up into heaven. And then there's the Jordan River, and you can see the prophets on the other side. Beautiful mosaic. But it was in the middle of nowhere, so it made us wonder, first of all, how do they know the exact location of an event that happened 3,000 years ago? Especially when it was out there in the wilderness where there's nothing else around. And then secondly, who exactly was Elijah, and what did he do to get such prominent display? So we came home and read the Bible stories and did some research, and I ended up writing a major paper on Elijah. And then in March of this year, just before COVID hit, we felt better prepared to go back to Israel and visit Mount Carmel and appreciate what Elijah did and understand the risks that he took. So Allison just read part of the story for you. I'll go back a bit and give you a little bit of the background. The story is set in the reign of King Ahab in the 9th century BCE. The original kingdom, you'll remember, had those wonderful kings with Saul and King David and King Solomon. Well, that kingdom is gone. It's now been split. The kingdom is now, we've got Israel at the top and we've got Judah at the bottom. And over the years, different kings reigned in each of these countries, and leadership was deteriorating. People were waffling in their beliefs. Sometimes they believed in God, but other times they worshipped these pagan deities. And then it got worse. King Ahab married Jezebel, who solely worshipped the pagan god Baal. Baal was the god of rain and dew, and the Jezreel Valley in Israel, it's that long valley that runs, there's the Mediterranean Sea on one side, and then there's the mountain range with Mount Carmel over here, and the Jezreel Valley is in between. So it is a very lush and green and fertile land. So we have a picture of it, and you can see it. This is a panoramic picture my husband took. We were standing on Mount Carmel at the top here, and we were looking down into the Jezreel Valley. So you can see there's olive groves, and there's trees, and there's land to grow things on, luscious green, and then there's the Mediterranean Sea in the background. So it's quite different than the first photo I showed you with that dry land in the rest of the country. Things were good, and although the fickle people worshipped many deities, Baal was the most popular. So Queen Jezebel supported 450 prophets of Baal, but she hunted down and killed the prophets of God. So needless to say, there weren't many people who would publicly admit that they worship God. Now enter our hero Elijah. Elijah was a very, very devoted prophet of God. And he was upset that people weren't exclusively worshiping God. He wanted to convince those waffling Israelites to worship God and God alone. So he told King Ahab that he prayed there would be a drought, and the rains would only come when he himself requested them. God answered his prayers, and the entire kingdom dried up, and remained in a drought for 3 years. When the famine was at its worst, God told Elijah, "It's time to go talk to King Ahab." This was very risky, as King Ahab had been looking for Elijah for 3 years without success. At this point, he was furious with Elijah, and he could have easily had him killed. But Elijah went ahead and he accused King Ahab of disobeying God, and then challenged him to a contest. And that's the contest that Allison just read for us. All of the people in Israel and the 450 prophets of Baal would meet at Mount Carmel on the southeast side of the Jezreel Valley. And remember, it wouldn't look like that picture I just showed you. It wouldn't be lush and green at this point. After 3 years of drought, it's dry and brown and dead looking. Both Elijah and the prophets of Baal would build an altar and prepare a sacrifice, but would not ignite the wood piled beneath it. Each was to call on their own god, and the authentic deity would respond by spontaneously igniting the tinder. Elijah was taking a huge risk. The location he selected was a well-known Baal worship site, as the elevation and the close proximity to the Mediterranean Sea meant that Mount Carmel received considerably more annual moisture than the surrounding area. So everyone expected Baal to give a command performance. This was his home territory. Elijah deliberately gave the home field advantage to his opponents. It was risky, but it also meant that if Baal failed here, his failure would be amplified because he was on home turf. And you know how the contest went. The prophets of Baal went first, but nothing happened. And then it was Elijah's turn. And God answered his prayers by sending down fire and burning the sacrifice. God's unmistakable response, coupled with the location, revealed Baal as a fraud. The people were now convinced that Elijah's God was the one true God, and they vowed to follow God. Elijah's risky challenge to King Ahab paid off. Now, if the story had ended there, it would have been wonderful. Elijah would have fulfilled God's wishes, and we would forever remember him as being a successful servant of God. But unfortunately, this isn't the case. It wasn't exactly a Hollywood ending to the story, because Elijah turns around and commits mass murder. He slays all 450 of the Baal prophets with his sword. So when Andrew and I were at Mount Carmel up at the top, we saw the statue of Elijah. There's me at the bottom. And then the statue of Elijah, and you can see up top, he's got his sword in his hand, and under his foot, he's got one of the prophets of Baal. he's killing them. So, surprise, surprise, when Queen Jezebel finds out that he's killed all of her prophets, she's not very happy. Jezebel swears to kill Elijah, so he flees. He runs away. And then that's a story for another day. Mm-hmm. But at the end of his life, Elijah and his protege Elisha cross over the Jordan River, and Elijah's taken up into heaven in a chariot of fire in a whirlwind. And that was the picture I showed you at the beginning of the mosaic. So God is pleased with Elijah. I thought of Elijah this week when I was reading a Globe and Mail article. It was called Risky Business. It said that taking a chance is good, but are we growing too bold? Just like Elijah grew bolder as the drought went on year after year and people got weaker and weaker, this article questioned if we're getting too bold when it comes to the COVID pandemic. It says that taking chances is the best and worst of human behavior. Without risk takers among us, we would dwindle and die in complacency and settled ways. But too much confidence results in us making rash decisions. Courage is a matter of knowing when and how to take chances, especially when we're afraid to. One of the problems is that, unlike Elijah, we don't really know the enemy. COVID keeps changing on us. It's mutating and morphing, so we can't calculate the risk. Elijah knew he was taking a risk, a huge risk, when he asked God to bring that 3-year drought on the people in order to prove his point. Many people would have died during that time due to lack of food and water. The price to human life and animal life and plant life, it was huge. But Elijah knew the battle lines. Unfortunately, today with COVID, the enemy is everywhere. There are no fixed lines of battle. We had the first wave go through last spring, but then, we got lax during the summer. We were outside more. We were able to get together with small groups of people. And some people even denied there even was a risk out there. And regrettably, after 7 months of living with this pandemic, many people are getting COVID fatigue. We're getting tired of not seeing our beloved seniors in retirement homes. We're getting tired of finances dwindling because we can't fully open our restaurants and businesses. And some parents are saying they're getting tired of teaching their children at home because they're not professional educators. We want to revolt. We want to get back to our old normal. But this isn't about what we personally here can handle. Black people, Indigenous people, poor people, homeless people, elderly people, they are bearing more than their fair share of the risk during this pandemic. And so not wearing a mask, or not keeping social distancing, or not washing your hands constantly could spell death to someone else. That's not misfortune. That's injustice. This upcoming week is posing yet another risk to us. Halloween is usually an exciting time for kids. They get to dress up in a costume and get to go trick-or-treating to all the neighbors and gather a variety of candy. If you've been listening to the news, you'll recognize that new health risks have been identified by health authorities. It's getting increasingly difficult to keep everyone safe and still continue with some of our traditions. We're being told to leave candy out on our front porch to eliminate human contact. But if we really want to see all those cute kids in their costumes, they're saying, well, wear your mask when answering the door, hand out candy using tongs, or devise some kind of tube or hockey stick or some way to get the candy to the children who are 2 meters apart from you. Kids are told not to snack on the candy as they make their rounds. Parents are told to wipe down each package of candy as it comes in the house and don't share it with anyone else in the household. One woman on CBC this week said, "It is hard to parent during a pandemic." How true. Somehow we need to find a way to continue following these healthy guidelines and support local businesses and support our frontline workers and be patient and be brave. We need to follow Elijah's example and take risks when appropriate. But this COVID pandemic, it's not one of those times. We need to remember that we're all in it together. We are not alone. Thanks be to God. Amen.